The people behind Deus Ex were building more than a game. Most people look at Deus Ex and think the reason it still feels powerful is because it somehow predicted the future. Surveillance, elite technology, hidden power, biotech, manipulation, all of that is there. But that is not the deepest reason the game still hits so hard. The deeper reason is the people who made it. Because the minds behind Deus Ex were not just stacking cool cyberpunk ideas together. They were combining role-playing, political suspicion, systems thinking, and believable future logic into one machine. And that is why the game still feels so close to real life now. It was not guessing random details. It was capturing the operating feel of the world we were already walking into. Start with Warren Spector. He was the driving force behind the original Deus Ex, but what is fascinating is where he says the real seed came from. He traced the game back to a Dungeons & Dragons campaign he started in 1978 with Bruce Sterling. Not just any campaign, and not just any dungeon master. Bruce Sterling would go on to become one of the key names associated with cyberpunk, but what stayed with Spector was something even more important. The feeling of building a world with other people, where the story was not simply handed to you, but shaped by how you moved through it. Spector later said he had basically spent his career trying to recreate that feeling in games. That changes how you see Deus Ex immediately. Because if that is the origin, then Deus Ex was never just supposed to be a sci-fi thriller. It was supposed to feel like a living system you could test, a world with hidden rules, a world where the player had to figure out how power actually worked instead of just listening to exposition about it. Spector wanted what he called a more grounded, real-world role-playing game, and that is a huge reason the game still feels eerie today. Modern life also feels like that. Most people now move through systems they did not design, following rules they do not fully see, learning by trial and error what gets you flagged, buried, boosted, blocked, watched, or rewarded. Then there is Harvey Smith, the lead designer. Harvey Smith helps explain why Deus Ex feels suspicious in a way that most games do not. In an oral history of the game, he talked about how the team discussed whether there was inherent bias in a game that simply gives you a mission to kill enemies without questioning it. And his answer was blunt. Yes, there is. That one idea tells you a lot about the design philosophy behind Deus Ex. The team was not treating mechanics as neutral. They understood that even a mission structure can carry ideology. Even the act of deciding who counts as a threat can already be political. That matters far beyond games. Because that same logic now lives everywhere. In moderation systems, in surveillance systems, in risk scoring, in recommendation systems, in security culture. In modern life, the system decided often sounds neutral, but it rarely is. Someone built the categories. Someone defined the thresholds. Someone decided what counts as suspicious behavior, what counts as acceptable behavior, and what kinds of responses will feel justified once the label has been applied. Harvey Smith's importance is that he helps us see that Deus Ex was asking those questions early, not just in the dialogue, in the structure itself. Then you get to Sheldon Pacotti, and this is where things become even sharper. Pacotti was one of the main writers behind Deus Ex, and years later he explained something crucial. He said he was already skeptical of the dot-com boom when he joined the team. He was working on a dystopian novel that satirized that world through biotech and AI. And when he encountered Warren Spector's vision of a future where high technology empowers elites, he saw it as sober futurism compared to the optimism all around them at the time. He also said the team was constantly sending each other headlines that reinforced the game's worldview. That means Deus Ex was not built from pure fantasy. It was built from pattern recognition. That may be the single most important thing to understand about the game. It did not endure because it got every detail right. It endured because its creators understood that the future would not arrive first as obvious tyranny. It would arrive as believable systems, as useful systems, as attractive systems, as systems that felt normal enough to live inside. That is the genius of Pacotti's contribution. He understood that the most powerful forms of control are often the ones that feel plausible, maybe even helpful before they feel dangerous. And once you see that, Deus Ex starts looking less like a wild conspiracy game and more like a map of how modern life actually hardens around people. Then there is Austin Grossman. His role is quieter but deeply important. Grossman came out of the immersive sim lineage around games like System Shock and Thief, and that lineage is one of the reasons Deus Ex tells its story the way it does. Not just through cutscenes or direct explanation, but through fragments, emails, terminals, offices, hidden routes, strange rooms, scraps of information, environmental clues. That approach trained players to reconstruct truth instead of passively receiving it. In other words, Deus Ex made information architectural. It made you work for understanding. And that feels even more modern now than it did in 2000. Because today most people do not receive reality as one clean, trusted story. They experience it as a broken archive, a feed here, a clip there, a screenshot, a leak, a rumor, a post, a statement, a correction, a deleted thread, a contradictory headline. Modern life feels like navigating scattered fragments and trying to decide what system ties them together. That is exactly why Grossman's side of Deus Ex matters so much. It is one of the reasons the game feels less like fiction and more like training. And when you put all of these people together, the shape becomes clear. Warren Spector brought the idea of the player moving through a living system. Harvey Smith brought the understanding that systems and mechanics are never neutral. Sheldon Pacotti brought the gift of plausible elite tech futures. Austin Grossman brought the archive world method, where truth has to be reconstructed from fragments. And all of that came together at Iron Storm Austin, where Spector had the creative freedom to finally build the kind of project he had been chasing for years. So what did they really create? Not just a game about secret societies and augmentations. They created a simulation of modern control before modern control became fully ordinary. That is why Deus Ex still feels so alive. It understands that power does not always present itself with a villain speech. Sometimes it shows up as an interface, sometimes as an access system, sometimes as a security layer, sometimes as convenience, sometimes as a health solution, sometimes as a platform you cannot really opt out of anymore. That is the deeper reason the game resonates. Its creators understood that the future would be governed less by loud commands and more by design conditions. And once you understand that, something else changes too. You stop seeing the people behind Deus Ex as just developers. They become interpreters, early readers of the pressure lines. A small cluster of minds that looked at the late 1990s and realized where the world was bending, toward invisible rules, concentrated technology, fragmented truth, procedural control, and systems that shape human behavior from the inside. Their achievement was not prophecy in the mystical sense. It was something more impressive. They decoded the operating feel of the future early enough to turn it into culture. That is why this topic matters now. Because if Deus Ex still feels relevant, it is not only because the game was brilliant. It is because the people behind it were paying attention to the right things. They understood that the next era would not just be about stronger machines. It would be about stronger systems. Systems that shape identity, access, truth, behavior, and belief. Systems that often remain believable enough to live inside, even while they quietly tighten around you. And that may be the real secret behind Deus Ex. Not that it predicted the future, but that the people behind it understood what kind of world we were already entering. If this topic made you see the world a little differently, leave a like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more. Look closer, see further, decide for yourself.